Ben, please tell us, what are the H4 and F2 spouse visas here in America?
Well, the H4 and the F2, those are the visas where you're the derivative. You're not the primary applicant, you're a derivative applicant. So you're either the spouse or the child of someone who's got the main visa. So the F1 visa holder who's studying in the US, or the H1B visa holder who's working in the US, but it could also be an H2A or an H3 visa holder, is going to have their visa first. And then you, as the spouse or the child of that visa holder, is going to accompany them to the US, but you also are going to need your visa. And that visa is called the F2 visa if you're the spouse of an F1 holder, or the H4 if you're the spouse of someone who's on a different H visa.
Yes, and as dependent visas, these can be tricky. So we're going to be breaking down some great tips for visa interviews on these. So friends, check it out. Hey friends, welcome to Chine Coaching. I'm Rob, and at Chine Coaching, we're all about helping you find success in your cross-cultural journeys, especially with visas and immigration, which is what we're going to be talking about in this video. We've got our awesome guest, Ben, who we've made some great content with. Ben, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone. Yeah, Rob, thanks for having me. I'm Ben. I'm a former visa officer myself. I was a U.S. diplomat and consular officer for many years, posted around the world doing those visas. I was behind the window, doing those interviews, making those decisions. I saw that it wasn't always done correctly. There were people getting refused who shouldn't be refused. And so now that I'm on the outside, I use that knowledge and that experience to help people pass their visa interviews.
Yes, your experience is super valuable. I love that we're going to be breaking down these spouse visas. I've got a lot of questions about those. You mentioned they can have some difficulty, specifically H4 and F2, but I know there's others out there as well. So these will kind of all help kind of cover that spouse or dependent category. But first, what would maybe just kind of the first tips that people can think about as they prepare for a spouse H4 F2 visa interview?
Well, there's a couple things, and there's a little bit of a difference between if you're going for an F2 or an H4. So let's talk about the F2 first. Your spouse is getting an F1 visa to study in the US. Maybe you're applying together. Maybe they're already in the US and you're applying for your visa afterwards. The main thing here that you want to be concerned about is making sure the visa officer believes that your relationship is legitimate. That's the real requirement to get this visa, is that your relationship is legitimate. So if the visa officer thinks that maybe it's not, you need to know beforehand. Culturally, sometimes the way that a marriage might come about, if it's an arranged marriage, might not be something that the US officer is as
Mm.
familiar with or as accustomed to. So educating them is part of the process. You know, if you've only met a couple times, but this is someone you've known from your families have known each other for many, many years, something like that, educate them. Don't just answer those questions abruptly in a way that's going to leave them with all
Mm.
these doubts. Let them know, yes, we did just get married 3 months ago, but here's the history, here's the backstory, here's the reason you can trust that this is
Mm.
a real relationship, a real marriage, not just something we concocted in order to get a visa issue.
Yeah, yeah. And anything else as preparing for like an H4 visa?
With the H4, it's the same thing, but the H4 actually, that's the only reason that a visa officer can, according to their regulations, which is called the Foreign Affairs Manual, can refuse your H4. If you're the spouse of an H1B, you can't be refused just because it's their judgment call that they think, no, I don't like
Mm.
it, right? Like the 214B refusal that you get if you're applying for a student visa or a tourist visa, they can't use that on an H4 applicant. They
Mm.
can use 214B only if they think that it's not a real relationship between the H1B holder and the H4 visa applicant. Okay, so
Mm.
that's a big difference. Now I tell you they can't do that. Unfortunately, people will have encountered the situation where maybe visa officers, consular officers make decisions that aren't really in accordance with their regulations. They have extensive regulations. They don't have the training to go through every one of those and know the minutia that's in all those regulations. And they're moving very quickly, so they can make a mistake. If they make a mistake and refuse you 214B, even though your relationship was presumed to be real, then you've got some recourse. You're going to be able to go back, and we've got a few ways where we can try to get inside the embassy, inside the consulate, and contact someone to let them know, hey, a procedural error was made. But
Mm.
otherwise, you really just need to focus on making sure that that relationship appears real, that they know that it's real, and then you're going to get that issue. Now, if you're the H4 spouse of an H2 or H3 visa holder, then it's different. Then you can just be refused the regular plain old 214B judgment call. Now,
Okay.
how is that different from the F2? The F2 is like that H2 or H3. The F2 can just be refused. There's nothing in the regulations that prevents them from refusing the spouse of someone who's studying in the US. Now, if anybody's done their research, and I know a lot of people out there will have done a lot of research on this, you'll have found the Foreign Affairs Manual regulation that says it should be very rare that a visa officer should refuse the F2 spouse of an
Hmm.
F1 visa holder. It says there, this should be very rare. And they are explicitly discouraged from ever saying, okay, well, I'm going to issue you your visa, ma'am, but you, sir, the student's husband, I'm going to refuse your visa so that your wife has a reason to come back from the US and come back home
Mm.
after
Mhm.
after she's done studying. They're told explicitly, do not do that.
Okay.
This kind of we'll say psychological hostage taking.
Mhm.
They're told explicitly not to do that. It still happens, right? Even just subconsciously, it still
Mhm.
happens. And so you've got two things with that F2. One, convincing the visa officer that your relationship is real. But two, you've just got to go through the same thing your spouse did in their visa interview in convincing them how legit the credentials are, how legit the plan is,
Mhm.
what the follow up plan is after the studies, right? It's all on the line again, right? It's not like, oh, that was all decided at the first interview. Now I'm just here to get my spouse visa. No, they're going to re adjudicate all that and think, am I just sending a whole family to the US forever? Or is it going to be legitimately used? So you're on the
Mm.
spot. It's not just a rubber stamp after your spouse has already gotten their visa. You're going to have to go in there and reprove everything.
Yeah, well, sounds like, yeah, it's not simple, cut and dry, and like we've said before in our conversations and webinars, it's all about getting your story clear, concise, and that makes sense, and especially so for you and your spouse, making sure that your guys' stories line up, sounds like it's really important. And so I think let's look more now, what are some of those common questions they might face so they can make sure they have, that story lined up in that visa interview? So what are those common questions?
Well, a lot of questions might be, well, why are you applying separately? Right? A lot of times
Mhm.
I know that the plan really is piecemeal, stepwise, right? Well, I'm doing this. My spouse is also in her studies, and then she's going to apply afterwards, and it goes like that, right? When they see that two spouses have applied separately, their first thought, they're always suspicious, right? They're
Mhm.
looking for people because there are people who are trying to trick them. There are people committing fraud. You need to be able to differentiate yourself to make sure
Mm.
they know that you're not one of those people. So when they see two spouses applying separately, they're thinking, oh, one got the visa, now someone else is applying, just trying to get a tag along visa, right? So they're thinking, okay,
Mhm.
there something may be afoot. So what do you need to do is go in and make sure that you know why you've applied separately, right? Not just, oh, I was busy at the time. That doesn't sound too believable, right? If it really was that you had an initial plan for one member of the family to go to the US and start studying, and then you changed your plan, right? I know that some of my clients have told me, yeah, me and my child, we're going to let our, my husband go to the U.S. and study. But really, like I just can't stand it. We've been apart for 6 or 8 months, and we just want to be together.
Mhm.
That's legitimate, right? But
Mhm.
tell that in a real, heartfelt way to the visa officer. Let them know that's the real reason.
Mhm.
Not,
Being honest is
oh,
important.
exactly. Being honest is important. If you can establish rapport, and honesty is what helps you establish rapport. Honesty and heartfelt expression, they're going to trust you more when they feel that you're telling them the truth like that, right? So if you tell them, yeah, we plan to be separate because I've got my parents here, they're able to help with the child care. We thought it would be convenient, but really, it's been 6 months and there's going to be another year and a half, and we don't want to stay separate for that long anymore. And so now we've
Mhm.
changed the plans and I'm going to the US, right? That's a perfectly legitimate reason, right? There's lots of good reasons as long as they're your reason and it's the true reason, and you're going to be able to let the visa officer know this is a real person with a real story.
What about any questions that they might ask either about, the legitimacy of the relationship or future plans? What might questions look like that for the people?
With the legitimacy of the relationship, if you've been together for a long time, if you've been married for a long time, right, you've got a marriage certificate from 2 3 years ago, or if you have a kid together, they're not going to be super suspicious of how legit the relationship is, right?
Okay.
Because it's been established for a while. If it's been recent, though, right? If this relationship is formalized legally, if you're married just recently, that's when they may have some doubts about
Hmm.
the legitimacy of it, right? So if you were married just recently, or this would be the most suspicious if you got married after the visa was issued, right? Because then it looks like, oh, now you've got a derivative visa status that is attractive and maybe even marketable, right? And so they're
Mhm.
thinking, okay, is this real or not? Don't hold back on the details, right? When the visa officer says, okay, so when did you get married? You know, okay, they're thinking, is my relationship real? So don't just
Mhm.
say September 23rd. That doesn't help them get to the point where they trust you. You say, well, we just got married in September when he came back from the US from his studies. We had the ceremony. I've got all the photos and everything. We had a big ceremony with everyone, and both families were involved. It was a love marriage, but both of our families support us. Right? Tell them all the details. Let them know
Mhm.
that this is a real thing. This is not just something with it's just surface level, and we just put it together to get the visa. That would be for the doubting the relationship and how it began. Now, you also asked about
Mhm.
the future plans. So the future plans, you're on a temporary visa to the U.S. I know a lot of people have maybe an aspiration to get an H-1B, to work in the U.S., maybe to get a green card in the future, but the visa that you're on has limits, and you need to plan for those limits. So you need to plan for once that visa runs out, what are you going to do? You can say, oh well, I'm definitely going to look for opportunities with OPT. That's on the same visa. After that, my plan's coming back home, and have a real plan, right? Everybody knows
Mhm.
that nothing with no, not even with OPT, that nothing's guaranteed. A job afterwards with an H-1B is not guaranteed, and so have a real backup plan, right? Have a real
Mhm.
plan that when the visa officer asks you about it, you can tell them exactly what you will do if that turns out to be your path. If you're going back home.
I love it. Yeah. Again, it's all about communicating, telling that story about your relationship, about your plans, and making sure the visa officers can understand it. My friends, I mean, I'm learning a lot. If you're learning a lot too, hit that like button to say thanks and cheers to Ben for downloading all this information. We got more to share. But our chai question for you guys is, where are you going to be having your visa interview? We'd love to hear from our chai and coaching audience. So yeah, let me know, where are you going to be giving your visa interview? Tell us the city or the country, which consulate or embassy. Would be love to know where you guys have those plans for. Ben, tell us maybe what are a couple of those big red flags that visa officers are going to be on the lookout for these spouse visas. For F2, H4. What's going to be a red flag that's going to cause a concern, lead to administrative processing, or even a rejection?
Mhm. Well, the biggest red flag is a recent marriage, right? We've already talked about this a lot. That
Hmm.
recent marriage is going to be the thing that's going to set off alarm bells in the visa officer's mind quicker than anything else. So if you have that recent marriage, know that that's going to be a main focus in the interview. That's one. Two is going to be anything that looks like maybe that spouse in the U.S. who's studying, maybe that study plan's not so legit. Okay,
Mm.
so if the spouse in the U.S. has gone to the U.S. and started out in a state university for a master's degree, and now has transferred to an English language program, that's going to look a little bit like the
Mm.
credentials are weak. So any type of change like that, or transcripts. Oh well, they dropped out of their classes. They didn't do well on their classes, and the transcripts don't look that good, right? What they want to see is a strong record of being a legit, committed, dedicated student in the U.S. If you're on that, if your spouse is on that
Mhm.
F1 visa in the U.S., that's really what they're going to want to see. If there's anything that indicates, oh, it's a little wishy washy, it's kind of it looks like there's not a lot of dedication to it, that's going to make them think, okay, maybe there's a different plan that they're hiding from me. The plan is not really to be dedicated to these studies.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And sounds like, these spouse visas are not a guarantee. There's definitely some navigation that takes place, some extra preparation to communicate well. So, Ben, how can you guys at Argo Visa help our friends to be best prepared and to really secure these, H4, F2 spouse visas?
Yeah, Argo Visa, we're a network of former visa officers. We've worked all over the world, speak a dozen different languages. I've worked with all the visa types. And now we use all of our expertise, having done a million visa interviews as government officials, to help visa applicants like you get
Mhm.
your visa issued. So you go to argovisa.com. Rob's going to put a link here with the video, and you can give us all your information. We're going to match you up with an officer that's worked in your country with your visa type, and really set you up for success in the visa interview. If you've been refused, we diagnose that. You tell us what happened in that interview. We can rely on our experience to
Mhm.
intuit what went wrong, what was in the visa officer's mind, what's going to be in their notes, and what's going to be the key for the next visa interview.
Yeah, and on the Argo Visa website, you guys have a really new cool feature now. It's a free chatbot tool, a visa checkup. And so if you're preparing, you can put H4, F2, put your information in there. It's going to ask you a dozen or so questions, and it's going to give you a score ranking on how likely you're going to either get an approval or rejection. So go check that out. That's a free resource, and you can check and see your confidence, whether you're good to go, or maybe you need some extra coaching, some extra help, or how to pivot from a rejection and get that approval the next time. Another really cool video we're going to be making with Ben is the K1 fiance visa. So we covered spouses. Now we're going to do fiance. So people who are engaged, proposed to be married. We'll have links for that as well. Check that out. And Ben, thanks so much. I learned a ton. This was insightful and appreciate you sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
My friends, be sure to connect with us online on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn. Get our e-newsletter as well for Chai and Coaching. I know Argo puts a lot of great content out on their social media as well. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time at Chai and Coaching. Cheers, everybody.